Hello, I'm Marites Vitug, and this is Worldview. We take a look at global, regional, and national affairs in conversations with officials, newsmakers, and analysts. Joining us is Enrico Gloria, a political science professor from the University of the Philippines. He's currently doing his PhD in Tsinghua University in Beijing and is one of the few China experts in the Philippines. We will be talking about Philippine-China relations and what is the way forward. Welcome to the show, Miko. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you.
And you're on break, right?
Yeah, I'm currently on break. Yeah.
From your studies
PhD.
in Beijing.
Yeah.
Now, one of maybe the most contentious issues in our foreign policy is really how it's playing out now with China.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
from a distance, since you've been studying in Beijing, how do you read President Marcos's policy towards China, and how do you see this playing out?
Yeah. So I think with respect to President Marcos's China policy, the administration has really placed the West Philippine Sea issue or the South China Sea dispute at the center, the cornerstone of our China policy. Whether that is good or bad is another question. There are certain indications that this is the case. West Philippine Sea is the main sticking point of our China policy. As we currently see, whenever we talk about China, it's always from that angle. But at the same time, there's also a second minor sticking point, or probably also a co-sticking point with the West Philippine Sea issue, and that is the issue of transnational crime. So we've seen that play out with, for instance, the case of Alice Guo here in the Philippines. So if we combine this all together, itong dalawa, West Philippine Sea and transnational crime, we are really seeing a China policy that is confrontational, right? And I think in the next 3 years of President Marcos's term, this will continue. The good thing about this is there's predictability, right? So we don't, unlike hedging policies of other Southeast Asian countries, it's really hard to read where these other countries stand. But with the Philippines, it's clear. We want a hardline position with respect to China, first and foremost with respect to our national interests in the West Philippine Sea, and then also, kaakibat nun is the transnational crime. Ang effect nun sa atin, the Filipinos, as we see, talagang nag-ramp up yung distrust towards China. And at the same time, another point that I would like to raise, we are actually actively campaigning for our position in the United Nations Security Council
as a
non-permanent member. And this is consistent with what I've said, yung central point ng China policy natin. Kasi I think the Marcos administration is bent on making the West Philippine Sea issue as an international issue and not just a national issue. An international issue with global implications, not just for the Philippines, but for other small powers or other countries who are also in the same position, right? So in that sense, there's potential there to actually strengthen rule of law, if you will, to strengthen multilateralism when it comes to posing a more credible challenge against major powers. So, yeah, from a distance, that's how I see the whole Marcos China policy.
Interesting yung point mo about the campaign to become a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council. I didn't see it that way kasi they're going to make it's going to be a forum for to air our grievances against China, and as you said, but it will, on the other hand, it will also shore up yung respect for rule of law.
Right.
And how do you see China responding to this? Because they only want a bilateral.
Yeah.
They want it to be a bilateral issue.
Well, yung sa UNSC, I think the major emphasis of the Philippines there is really multilateralism and rule of law. Not so much to, demonize China at a global scale. Probably that would be the effect, but really it's about strengthening the role of the Philippines. Sabi nga nila, as pathfinder and peacemaker. With respect to China, following that rule of law, we have to understand China's consistent position here. For them, since day one, they have been abiding with the rule of law, with international law. For instance, yung pag-reject nila sa arbitration, for them, that is consistent with UNCLOS. Kasi arbitration naman should not involve an outsider third party according to their perspective. So from their perspective, there's nothing non-respectful of the rule of law, no? So if that's the case, we are basically articulating different perspectives on how to respect the rule of law. So what matters here is who buys which perspective. Which perspective would become more popular, so to speak, no? And if we look at the ICEAS survey, this is a very important survey by the ICEAS Institute in Singapore.
ICEAS, for our viewers, is Institute for Southeast Asian Studies. It's a very good think tank in Singapore.
And they've been running a Southeast Asia survey report every year since 2018 or 2019. If you see there, actually, many Southeast Asian countries are gradually, although slowly, buying to the narrative that China is a responsible major power with respect to the rule of law. So, nagiging effective yung strategy niya, constantly saying that we are respecting the rule of law. And ang reflection sa atin nun, yes, we are stressing the arbitral award, but unfortunately, it doesn't seem to reflect, no, with strong support from other Southeast Asian members.
Just going back to itong 2025 ASEAN Southeast Asia survey ng ICES, one of the key findings is that the ASEAN respondents' top priority is for China to resolve territorial and maritime disputes peacefully and with international law. So that's the perception of majority of the respondents. So, and I think this is particularly pressing for claimant countries plus Indonesia.
Right.
So, I mean, how will China respond to this if they have their own? Kasi we're on separate tracks, as you said, no? We have two views of what the rule of law is. So, paano mag-respond ang China dito?
I think China is already expecting this to be the position of small powers. Kasi as a small power, or as a middle or small power in ASEAN, 10 countries, for them it makes sense, no, to lean towards international law, especially emphasizing yung binding nature towards major powers or towards big powers. So kumbaga, it's very important for these ASEAN countries to emphasize international law. Now, with respect to how China will respond to that, no, I think yung halimbawa nabanggit niyong survey, actually lumiit yung pag-attach ng importance ng Southeast Asian countries towards peaceful resolution of maritime disputes using international law. It is still the dominant concern, pero lumiit yung emphasis. So what does that mean? China's strategy towards Southeast Asia and countering that dun sa South China Sea is actually working. So what are those strategies? Multi-pronged. Hindi lang through their pronouncements. I think through their economic engagements primarily. Primarily through that. And at the same time, there are also other external factors that fortunately is playing out for China. For instance, the reputation of the United States right now is not too rosy for ASEAN member countries.
You're very kind. Okay, go ahead.
So yun din, with external factors that are playing out in favor of China. And at the same time, in other disputes internationally, in Ukraine, in Gaza, China is actually actively playing a more responsible role. No, at least that's how they emphasize it. And that's how other Southeast Asian nations are seeing it, based on the survey, right? So all of these combined, no, effect nun sa South China Sea, not so much a sore thumb as we see it here in Manila. No, so that's how.
You wrote an interesting opinion piece for Rappler, and then you said that the challenge for the Philippines is to engage China in productive dialogue. It's to seek compromise where possible. Parang there's too much tension between these two countries. How can this be achieved? What is a possible compromise when it comes to our maritime dispute? And earlier we were talking, maybe you can also continue to that idea of a two-track diplomacy. Are we able to, I mean, can both countries separate security and political relations from economic and trade relations?
Okay, so first on the issue of compromise,
Yes.
no, we have our valid interests in the West Philippine Sea, and I think with the 2016 arbitral award, no, we've really narrowed down options for doable compromises with China. But I guess we can frame compromise sort of elevating areas of cooperation with China, as opposed to just emphasizing points of confrontation with them. No, so possible areas of cooperation. First, I think yung pagsugpo natin sa transnational crime. That's a very big low-hanging area of cooperation and low-hanging fruit, especially for China's perspective. No, it could elevate China's position or image as a responsible power that they are consistently claiming, and at the same time, it's really one of the most pressing problems that we have here, no, in the Philippines with respect to our policy with China. Second, area of cooperation, as you've mentioned, is it possible to separate strategic or political from the economic? Not completely separate. Kasi if you consider the counterfactual na good relations tayo with China, definitely there would be more trade that would flow with China, from China. There would be more FDI coming from China and vice versa. But at the same time, even though we are at a very sorry position with our relations with China, China is still our number one destination for trading partner, destination for exports. No, foreign direct investments are still coming in from China. No, so this is a possible area of cooperation, and at the same time with tariffs, possible tariffs coming from the United States, although that has been paused, there's an opportunity to create our supply chains regionally more tariff-proof, no, more resilient towards these kinds of setbacks in international trade. No, as for the specifics, no, that is up for our policymakers and those in the government to figure out.
So, parang the skills, the negotiating skills of our diplomats, of our trade people, parang dun yung challenge sa kanila.
Right.
Because during one of the heated periods of our maritime dispute with Beijing, I read about our DTI, trade and industry people, and some, I think, private Filipinos or just DTI, doing a road show in Beijing and in Shanghai to make them interested in investing in the Philippines. But that was a quiet, just, I just saw one small report.
Right.
So if this can go on, do you think China will invest more even if we have maritime disputes?
I think so, kasi at the same time, China is not a monolith. There are many different actors playing out in China, many different interests, especially the business interests, no, would really like to tap on the growing Southeast Asian market. Especially yun nga, with the Western economies being more volatile. So Southeast Asia is really at the position to capitalize on the growing regional market. Would that be leveraged against the maritime disputes? So far, we haven't seen that happen, no? So what we see with respect to maritime dispute, yung gray zone tactics talaga in West Philippine Sea, that has been escalating. But whether that will spill over in the economic arena, I am personally doubtful. We haven't seen that. And it's a product more so of China being more sophisticated in how it applies pressure to the Philippines. For example, it sanctioned Francis Tolentino. No, it's a very targeted sanction. It is a sanction, but not a sanction towards the entire banana export that it did back in 2012.
The day after he stepped down from the Senate.
Exactly. So medyo suave, medyo subtle, di ba?
So what is that message? What are they signaling by sanctioning? Just don't be noisy? I mean...
kasama yun. So I think that's the main point, no? They don't want actors internationalizing the dispute. I think that's a very sticking point for China. Look at the case of Malaysia and Vietnam. Yes, they have sizable disputes with China, pero hindi ganun ka-intense yung pag-internationalize nila. Am I saying that we are wrong for internationalizing it? No, I'm not saying that it's wrong. It's working on our advantage because we are solidifying the alliances and the partnerships that we have. But we must also be cognizant of basically aware of the repercussions with our relations with China. This is the price we pay, right?
Yes.
Going back lang to the sanctions against Tolentino, what's being signaled there is resolve. No? China is confident, resolved in responding, but at the same time, it makes sure that it's going to be targeted. No? It's going to
I see.
have like a still space for negotiation and still an opportunity to see that the bilateral relations is more than just the dispute.
See, I think in the case of the Philippines, because we have a very outspoken defense secretary, who's really pissed off by China every time something happens. And then, so I think the role now of the Foreign Affairs Secretary and the diplomats is to because I don't know if China understands our system, that we speak out, but the defense secretary can say what he likes because he doesn't do diplomatic work.
Right.
Does China understand that he has to do this because he represents, the men in uniform, while at the same time, our foreign secretary will have to do her role, our new secretary.
Right.
Do they see the difference?
The nuances.
The nuances, yeah?
Probably not so much as how we see it, as you've put it, no. The way they see it kasi, it's all domestic politics playing out in the Philippines. So they see that these actors are making these noises kasi it benefits the current administration with respect to differentiating Marcos from, say, Duterte, right? So, ganun binabasa ni China at least yung why we are so intense when it comes to our rights in the West Philippine Sea, because China thinks that it props up support for the Marcos administration. No? And they're not wrong in that. No,
Correct.
I think that's also one of the reasons why the current administration is really emphasizing the anti-China angle of their overall policy. No? Kasi it helps voters distinguish between Duterte's and the Marcoses, the good and the bad, no, so to speak.
But even if that's the case, and I think you also wrote about this, that foreign policy, our China policy, wasn't a factor in the victory or defeat of the senatorial candidates.
Right.
It was an issue when it came maybe to social media, discussions, but when the voting happened, we could see that it really didn't matter, I think, to the voters. Right?
I think kasi it didn't matter kasi nasapawan siya nung mas pressing domestic political issues especially with the arrest of former President Duterte in The Hague. Doon talaga naging confusing, if you will, no? yung policy ni Marcos when it comes to resolving or managing the rift with the Dutertes, no? Which I think kind of irked other potential supporters for Marcos's slate. So I think it will only matter if other issues are more or less handled very well, no? That could potentially shift the feelings or the decision-making of the voters towards foreign policy issues. Yeah.
And you also wrote a very interesting piece in South China Morning Post where you showed that China is really pivoting now towards Southeast Asia. So anong factors ang nag-lead sa China to expand or maybe deepen pala its relations with us in the region? As you said earlier, hindi na maganda yung reputation ng America under Trump, and it's looking inward.
Right.
So that's one of the reasons why China is pivoting towards Southeast Asia?
That's one of the main reasons, no? So the reputational opportunity for China to capitalize on the inward-looking approach of the United States. But more than that, to be quite frank about it, no, Trump's hardline position on China has really hurt China's economy. So, focusing on Southeast Asia, on its immediate neighbor, makes strategic and logical sense, no? Especially in the economic realm. So, yung emphasis ni China on Southeast Asia, while it is not new, it has been going on since Xi Jinping assumed power in 2013, mas na-magnify ngayon because of this trade dispute with Trump and US and China, no? So we see that, I think that will be one of the main flagship policies of China moving forward when it comes to its foreign policy. More emphasized Southeast Asia policy, if you will. Yeah.
So, we talked earlier, before the interview, about how different we are from other Southeast Asian countries when it comes to
Right.
China policy. So, ang tingin ng China and maybe other countries also in the region is that outlier tayo.
Right, yeah.
So, does this mean that the Philippines has minimal support from Southeast Asia? And how is China playing on this as well? Yeah.
So on the minimal support,
Yeah.
I think that other Southeast Asian countries actually do not fully support or strongly support our case in the West Philippine Sea. Our case meaning having an assertive and aggressive position against China, just because we have a dispute in the South China Sea. No? So how does that fare? Does China know about this dynamic?
Yeah.
I think China is very well aware that the Philippines is a lone actor when it comes to the South China Sea dispute. And this is not something new. I guess na-magnify lang ngayon kasi yun nga, under the Marcos administration, we decided to go full throttle in that position. No? So how does that play out in the region? I think there's also a benefit to the Philippines playing that role of the outlier. Kasi in international politics, no, the role of small powers is to really hedge or to, play these two major powers against each other. And collectively, ASEAN, if we have that country playing that position, then we are ensuring that the United States, although it is inward-looking, will still actively have a position in the region. And China will be on its toes. It will be a deterrent against China, right? Sabi nga nila, the stability of the region for many years is because Southeast Asia has successfully hedged between these two powers. And that's part of the grander hedging strategy of the bloc, of the ASEAN bloc as a whole.
But as you said earlier, and the ICEA survey also shows it, pumipili na Southeast Asian countries are leaning na towards China. Is that, Foreign Affairs also wrote about it, that Southeast Asian countries are starting to choose. Is that accurate?
I would say it's overemphasized yung ganong position. I don't see any Southeast Asian country except for the Philippines because we have an alliance with the
Correct.
United States,
Yeah.
actively choosing which side of the pole to lean towards to. If you would look closely at the survey, actually medyo volatile pa kasi nasa 53 to 47, no, hindi pa siya active na like dun talaga sa other side. So it's more of a testament that sanay na si ASEAN to actually play this role of a hedger between these two countries, regardless of what happens with the competition between US and China. Although this should not be a cause for relaxation for China. I think at the same time, no, yung retreat ni US can possibly alter that dynamic then, no? Especially if China plays its cards well, meaning really provides more economic benefits for Southeast Asian countries, no? Especially with the emphasis on renewable energies, EVs, and AI, those, very productive industries. Yeah.
And you also wrote that China has recognized the need to build mutual trust with us in Southeast Asia. So paano nila gagawin to if they keep, doing gray zone operations in the West Philippines? How can they build mutual trust?
I think yung mutual trust aspect has been emphasized nung recent visit ni Xi Jinping, I think around April in Southeast Asia.
Except the Philippines.
Except the Philippines.
Not
Very
except,
obvious.
Only 3 countries. They can only go to 3 countries.
Only 3 countries, pero sunod-sunod. So medyo, that sends a statement eh.
I see.
So, mutual trust in a sense na Xi Jinping is ready to work with the Southeast Asian countries. And for Southeast Asian countries, that means we can actually ask for more leverage from China at this point. So, mutual trust dun sa gray zone tactics sa South China Sea. Yun nga eh, kasi we are probably the lone actor there that wants to develop an assertive position. So, whether we can build mutual trust from our perspective, no, that is still in a wait and see type of scenario. But I am hopeful kasi yung bilateral consultative mechanism natin sa South China Sea has been going on regularly despite these, scenarios in the South China Sea. We have not closed our communication channels with China. So we are still talking with China. And again, yung laikong point of comparison is 2012 and 1995, no? So we were...
1995 was when Mischief Reef was
incident,
grabbed, and 2012 was the
Scarborough Shoal incident.
Okay.
Doon talaga froze yung communications natin during that time. So we've come a long way. So I think both Philippines and China have learned to coexist. That this is going to be a status quo, hardening our own respective non-compatible positions, no? But at the same time, we are also willing to talk with each other. And I think that is a point for us to become hopeful that the mutual trust can, slowly be rebuilt. No? But at the same time, I think significantly building mutual trust will not start with this administration. We have to be frank about that. No, probably in the next administration, I don't know what will happen.
We don't know who will be our next president, but I was just thinking that if Sara Duterte wins, if she runs and wins in 2028, that will be a win for China, right?
Right. They see it as, they still harken back to the good old days of the Dutertes, the way I see it in Beijing. No? Some observers there has always, or constantly asks me, what happened to the Dutertes? Are we still going back to that time where...
I mean, with nostalgia?
Nostalgia. Ganun ka. But at the same time, they're already slowly seeing the Philippines as a volatile partner. Kasi we have been from GMA down to Marcos. We have always been oscillating between confrontation and cooperation. So for them, they are, developing a more rational approach towards their Philippine policy, if that makes sense, no? And ang translation nun, they just equate Philippine foreign policy with what the Americans are doing in the region. So, kumbaga for them, the Philippines is really under the whims of the bigger structural or, systemic changes in the region. So
that turns off Marcos.
Yeah, kasi yun nga, ang emphasis natin ngayon, no, we have our own agency.
Strategic agency, we decide for ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. But in Beijing kasi, for them, they have bigger problems there. They have bigger fish to fry. So yes, we understand that you have your own agency, but at the same time, from our position, no, we are seeing US acting up in Ukraine, in Palestine, in South China. It's all American. It's the American boogeyman for them. And this is the problem with a big power and a small power relating with one another. There's always going to be asymmetry. So you can never see the perspective of the small power because you're not a small power. You won't be able to understand that. And for the small power, you won't be understand that from China's POV, from Beijing's POV, their foreign policy is not South China Sea, right? It's just South China Sea is probably just 10% of their entire foreign policy concern. So, ang ibig sabihin ba nito, inevitable that we're going to have miscommunication and mistrust? No, and I think this is where, cliche as it sounds, pero communication and constant engagement comes in. This is where the role of our diplomats really important, no? Our role of journalists and academics. And yun nga so yung isa kong area of cooperation then is actually educational exchanges with China. I myself is an advocate of that and a product of that. No? We see that some scholars are having problems right now going to the United States because of the current Trump presidency. No? There are many actually opportunities, not just in China, but in Asia, no? For training and education that we should also look to. No? So
maybe towards this last part of our interview, let's talk about Taiwan. Is this part of your study, your PhD, or are you just looking at China and its foreign policy? But it includes Taiwan, right?
Yeah. So cross-strait relations,
Yes.
well, sa China kasi it's more considered as an internal
province.
affair.
Yeah.
So it's an internal affair for them. So
yeah,
I
but- yeah.
rarely touch on it, but we also kind of discussed what will happen inevitably with
because
respect to Taiwan.
of course there's different scenarios from invasion to quarantine to blockade to influence operations wherein they can take over without firing a single shot.
Right.
So what's your reading? What's China's plan?
Well, China's emphasis talaga is still peaceful reunification, right? Although it's not renouncing the use of force.
Correct.
Yun yung lagi na sinasabi. So peaceful reunification, daming interpretations niyan. And I think yung talagang lumalabas ngayon sa analysts, it would be through cyber warfare or economic blockades, no? So that would be the main approach if ever that happens, no? The use of force is something that they don't want to touch on that much, but they are also not renouncing it completely. So what does that mean? It's basically when the other side uses force, that when China would probably counter with the use of force, no? So economic blockade, given that that's the likely option, when is it gonna happen? Yun yung next question. Eh. So that is up to the Chinese government to answer, no? Something that also is quite medyo malabo pa ngayon. But definitely, the reason why also they keep on extending Xi Jinping is also because of the Taiwan question. So yung great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation is actually anchored on that reunification. So, and that's the major slogan of Xi Jinping's foreign policy. Xi Jinping's policy when it comes to China's
So what
rights.
will this mean for the Philippines if there will be economic blockade, if they will short of force, if they'll do anything to Taiwan, what will this mean for us?
Right. I think inevitably through our alliance, we would be asked to support whatever U.S. position will be in that particular dispute. No, so we will definitely get involved in one way or another, and I think we have to be prepared in terms of how to recalibrate our alliance with the U.S. if we really want to get involved. And at the same time, I think tama yung emphasis ng DFA ngayon na it's really the welfare of our OFWs there that needs to be emphasized.
Yeah.
I think we are top 3 in terms of the number of migrants after Vietnam and Indonesia. So, and this is also a way for us to cooperate with our ASEAN partners, on how we can collectively secure the interests of ASEAN migrants in Taiwan.
Yeah, it's that's the fear here that the Philippines may get involved. Number one priority is really to repatriate or help our Filipino OFWs. But the other fear is really will we get involved in the war? But as you said, it's I don't know if this has been discussed already in policy circles here. But there's nothing public really written about
we can only
it.
speculate,
Yes,
no? But at the same time, speculation also has its value. China is also looking at what's happening with Russia and Ukraine. Russia has, not enjoyed popular support because of its actions in Ukraine.
Yes.
So China is watching closely on what should I do when I enter that position already. So that's why it's always emphasizing peaceful reunification, gray zone tactics, towards reclaiming Taiwan. Right?
Yeah. The economist wrote dark gray.
Right, dark
gray zone tactics.
Gradations pala.
Yes. So anyway, at least the use of force is just stated there, but the scenario you were talking about is more economic.
Right,
okay,
yeah.
So that's not too fearful. It's not something really, it will affect us economically as well, but what we fear is really an outright invasion.
Yeah, which I think China also doesn't want to happen, to be quite frank about it, no? Kasi China has this reputation as a responsible, peaceful power, although we can say na it's just polemics and rhetoric, no? But China, I think, is really emphasizing that because it wants to differentiate itself from the Western powers, from the European, that includes Russia, actually. So, kasi Russia invaded China before, so it wants to distinguish itself as a benevolent, benign Asian power, no? So we have to seriously consider its pronouncement that it doesn't want to use force, although we are not renouncing it.
Yes.
And I think that's perfectly valid. If you have something of interest, say if Palawan, for instance, would be occupied, we will never renounce the use of force as well. Right?
Okay. Yeah, on that note, it's very illuminating. Thank you so much, Miko. That's it for today's show. It's a pleasure to have you here in Rappler. I'm glad that you're on a holiday or a break. So thank you to our viewers. To continue the discussion, download the Rappler Communities app and join our chat channels. This has been Worldview with Marites Vitug. Till next time.